The Zarathian warship descended through Earth's atmosphere like a god of war, its dark hull blotting out the sky. Cities fell silent as its shadow passed, the world collectively holding its breath. Humanity had heard stories of the Zarathians, tales of entire planets laid to waste, of civilizations wiped from existence with the sweep of a hand. The strongest species in the galaxy had arrived, and there would be no negotiating. High Commander Vorik stood at the edge of the landing ramp, surveying the planet with sharp, predatory eyes. He had conquered a dozen worlds, and each time the resistance had been immediate, desperate, and ultimately futile. Yet here, on this strange blue planet, there was no battle, no mobilization of forces, no defiant last stand. The humans merely watched. The city before him stretched endlessly, its towering structures glistening under the midday sun. Roads buzzed with activity, but not the panicked evacuation he expected. Instead, people moved as if nothing had changed, as if a fleet of warships hadn't just announced their subjugation. The humans who gathered at the landing site were unarmed, their expressions unreadable. A man in a dark suit stepped forward, his hands clasped neatly behind his back. "You are the rulers of this world." Vorik's voice was a low growl, his native tongue translated through the device on his wrist. The man gave a small smile. "Not exactly. We don't have rulers, Pressi. We have leaders, governments, institutions. You'll find that humanity is complicated." Vorik narrowed his eyes. Complicated was not a word that concerned him. He was a creature of war, and war was simple. "Then tell your leaders to kneel. The Zarathian Dominion claims this world." The human tilted his head, considering the statement. There was no fear in his eyes, no anger, just quiet observation. "Very well," he said. "We surrender." Vorik waited for something more, a catch, a ploy, but the human only stood there, composed. No outcry came from the crowd. No one screamed or protested. The air remained still. Surrender was an inevitability when facing the Zarathians, but never had it come so easily. It was unsettling. As days passed, Vorik and his warriors took control of Earth's major cities. Humanity's governments relinquished power without a struggle. Military forces disbanded upon command. The Zarathians established their rule effortlessly, encountering no hidden armies, no guerrilla fighters, no desperate revolutionaries. The war that should have been never came. It should have been a triumph. Yet Vorik could not shake the unease creeping into his mind. His warriors reported strange things. Humans did not resist, yet they did not cower. They obeyed orders, yet their compliance never felt like submission. They smiled, as if they knew something the Zarathians did not. One day, a lieutenant approached him, his tone wary. "Commander, the humans have not fought back, but they have not truly yielded either." Vorik's claws tapped against the metal of his command throne. "Explain." "They move among us as if we are the guests, as if this is temporary." Vorik had noticed it too. The way humans talked to his soldiers without fear, the way they conducted their daily lives unchanged. The Zarathians occupied their cities, their institutions, their homes, yet the humans remained comfortable. A report came in of a Zarathian patrol demanding obedience from a group of human workers. The humans complied, but the following day, the patrol's rations were delayed. Their weapons malfunctioned. Orders became tangled in bureaucratic red tape. The humans never raised a fist, never uttered a word of defiance. Yet things began to shift ever so slightly out of Zarathian control. And still they smiled. Vorik's instincts, honed from years of conquest, screamed at him. Something was wrong. This was not the submission of the defeated. It was something else entirely. He watched from atop his command post as the city stretched below him. His warriors walked among the humans, clad in armor, weapons at the ready. The humans moved past them as if they were no more than statues. An old woman scolded a Zarathian officer for blocking the entrance to her shop. A child laughed and reached for a warrior's clawed hand, unafraid. They had won, and yet it felt as though they had lost. Vorik clenched his fists. He had crushed armies, shattered empires. But he had never faced an enemy that refused to acknowledge him as one. This was not war. This was something far worse. Vorak paced the length of the command chamber, the dim glow of holographic displays casting jagged shadows across his armored form. His claws flexed at his sides, the unease gnawing at him like a blade pressed too tightly against the skin. His warriors had taken the planet with ease. Too much ease. And now, the cracks in their victory were beginning to show. The humans still obeyed, still smiled, but their compliance had an edge to it, like a blade hidden beneath silk. Orders were carried out, yet always with some minor delay, some unforeseen complication. Zorathian supply chains were disrupted by what appeared to be bureaucratic errors. Shipments lost in an endless tangle of human paperwork. Warriors stationed at key locations found themselves buried in legal disputes they did not understand, presented with documents citing obscure laws that rendered their presence problematic. It was as if the humans were fighting a war that the Zorathians had never been trained to counter. A sharp chime interrupted his thoughts. The doors of the chamber hissed open, and a Zorathian lieutenant entered, flanked by 2 guards. Between them, a human walked with an air of casual confidence, hands bound but shoulders relaxed, his sharp eyes sweeping the room. Vorak studied him. He was older, dressed in the crisp uniform of one of Earth's now-defunct institutions. A scholar, perhaps. A strategist. The human gave a slight nod, the barest hint of amusement flickering in his gaze. "High Commander," he said, as if addressing an equal. Vorak bristled at the lack of fear. "Your name?" "Elias Carter." "A scholar." "A historian," Elias corrected smoothly. Vorak gestured sharply, and the guards released him. "You understand your situation." Elias tilted his head slightly. "That depends." "Do you?" Silence. Then Vorak leaned forward, his tone edged with warning. "You are conquered people." Elias smiled, slow and deliberate. "Are we?" A growl rumbled low in Vorak's throat. "You surrendered without a fight. You allowed us to take your cities, your governments. There was no resistance." "True," Elias conceded. "And yet here we are." Vorak narrowed his eyes. "You believe yourselves undefeated?" Elias exhaled, glancing around the chamber, as if considering his next words carefully. "Tell me, Commander, what do you know of human history?" Vorak stiffened. "Enough." Elias arched a brow. "Enough to understand how we've survived for millennia, despite never being the strongest? Enough to know why our species, fragile as it is, has endured longer than empires that should have crushed us." Vorak did not answer. Elias took a slow step forward. "We are not the Zorathians. We do not conquer by strength. We do not fight battles we cannot win. You've mistaken our surrender for submission, but that's not what we do." He smiled, teeth flashing. "We adapt. We wait. We shift the rules of engagement until the enemy doesn't even realize they're playing the wrong game." Vorak's claws curled. "You believe this manipulation will undo what we've built here?" Elias met his gaze evenly. "It already has." Vorak's mind raced, unspoken doubts clawing at his certainty. The delays, the disruptions, the quiet defiance woven into every interaction. It was no accident. It was a strategy. "You're not fighting us on the battlefield," he murmured. "No," Elias agreed, "because you've already won that fight. But what happens when the war isn't about brute strength? What happens when it's fought with ideas, with patience, with influence? How do you conquer a people who refuse to see themselves as conquered?" Vorak felt the weight of the words settle over him like a vice. The uneasy feeling that had haunted him since the moment they arrived on Earth crystallized into something cold and undeniable. This war was far from over, and for the first time in his long and decorated career, Vorak was not certain he knew how to win. Vorak stood at the heart of his warship, staring at the shifting hollow map of Earth. It no longer displayed the bright crimson overlay of an unquestioned occupation. Instead, fractures ran to the data feeds, supply chains tangled beyond repair, command centers buried under endless human legal challenges, entire sectors where Zorathian orders were ignored with infuriating civility. The planet had not risen in open rebellion. It hadn't needed to. The humans had unraveled their victory from within. He turned as his lieutenant entered, his stance rigid with barely contained frustration. "High Commander." The warrior began. Our requisition orders for fuel shipments have been delayed. The human transport agencies claim new safety inspections are required before any cargo is moved. A pause. The inspections, they tell us, may take several months. Vorik exhaled sharply through his nose. And the labor force? Less than half reported today. Many claim illness. Others say they did not receive their schedules in time. We have investigated, but the lieutenant's mandibles clenched. The system logs confirm their excuses. Someone has altered the records. Someone. The word was almost laughable. This was not the work of a single infiltrator or a hidden resistance cell. This was the humans, all of them, moving as an unseen force, not with weapons but with bureaucracy, with inefficiency, with rules and regulations so dense they might as well have been walls. Have our warriors enforce compliance, Vorik ordered. The lieutenant hesitated. We have tried. Those we reprimand produce documents proving they are within their rights. If we ignore their laws, the humans document that too, submitting formal grievances that escalate to other agencies. Vorik's claws drummed against the steel console. He had faced enemies who fought to the last breath, who would rather die than surrender. But this was something else entirely. The humans obeyed every command with the precision of a blade slipping between armor plates, bending without breaking, giving ground without losing position. He had underestimated them. A soft chime signaled a visitor. Vorik turned to see Elias Carter standing at the threshold, hands in his pockets, his posture irritatingly relaxed. The guards had stopped treating him like a prisoner. Somewhere along the way, without force, without coercion, the human had become something else. An advisor, a specter of inevitability. You look troubled, Commander, Elias said, stepping forward. Vorik studied him. The human's gaze held no malice, no smugness, only certainty. How long have you been fighting this war? Vorik asked. Elias tilted his head. Which one? Vorik gestured around them. To the very air, to the invisible battlefield where the Zarathians were bleeding out. Elias smiled faintly. Since the moment you arrived. Vorik exhaled slowly. He had no doubt of that now. The humans had never surrendered. They had simply shifted the battlefield to one where brute force was meaningless. Tell me, Vorik said, his voice quieter now. Do you think you won? Elias studied him for a long moment, then shook his head. Not yet. He gestured to the failing holomap. The red zone shrinking by the day. But you're starting to understand why you never really held this planet, not in the way you thought. Vorik's mandibles tightened. He was a warrior. He had conquered worlds. And yet, against these creatures, against their patience, their quiet, insidious war, he could feel the inevitable creeping toward him like a tide that could not be stopped. Elias clasped his hands behind his back. The Zarathian dominion is built on power, strength, direct action, that works against enemies who play the same game. His gaze sharpened. We don't. Vorik knew he was right, and for the first time in his long career, he felt the bitter taste of a war lost not in battle, but in something far more absolute, a war lost without ever truly beginning.